Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to East Central Missouri and the world, and welcome to the James Strong Show podcast, podcast number 322. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for making us a part of your day. I appreciate it. This podcast was recorded on the morning of Sunday, July the 16th, from the James Strong studio in western St. Charles County. Doing the podcast on a Sunday because I was working on the 51 Jaguar most of the day yesterday, starting about 8 o'clock in the morning, going till about 2:30 in the afternoon. Dad came by, helped me out, and we got a lot done. Actually, we installed the taillights onto the Jaguar, started to assemble the lighting assembly that holds the license plate on, and the backup lights and the tail lights, or not the tail lights, but the backup lights and the license plate lights. And you think to yourself, why did that take so long? And then I also did some work on the plumbing for the cooling system also. But you think to yourself, why did that take so long? I saw what you posted before, and you've got the tail lights already assembled. So it took you and your dad the better part of 4 hours to bolt those things onto a car. Yeah, actually it did. And you think to yourself, well, why? 3 bolts on each one? Well, here's the thing. If you look at the curvature of that car on the inside and the outside, and the curvature of the taillights, in theory, they would match up just fine. But you got to remember that this is sheet metal that was made in 1951. They didn't have computers. Things weren't perfect. Then they had kind of adapter brackets that kind of let you hold them in on the inside. So picture a curvature of a fender that's not symmetrical on the outside and the inside, that's been reworked by a guy who fixed 72 years worth of rust, painted it, put a POR finish on the inside, and now things are not only more indifferent than they were in 1951, but they're almost infinitely indifferent. So the brackets, one of the brackets had to be altered on my milling machine to make it actually fit and adapt and hold the taillights in properly. So while I scrunched up in the trunk, Dad held them on the outside. We got everything bolted together, and it looks quite good. But the theory was, if I do the podcast, I don't get to the shop until 10 o'clock in the morning. If I'm working 6 hours, that's 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Those last 2 or 3 hours are brutally hot, and I don't get to have a dip in the pool because we go to 5 o'clock mass on Saturday night. So I thought, let me think, if I do a podcast, if I get up early and just go right to the shop without doing a podcast, I can get 6 hours of work done on the car and get a dip in the pool before we go to church. So that's why I'm doing it on a Sunday and not a Saturday. By the way, for those of you who are thinking, why is it taking so long to put this car back together? My father asked the same question. Now, what I wanted to say, but I didn't say, is, Dad, you've been working on this car for about 55 years. And you got almost nothing done. But I didn't. I wasn't a smart aleck. Besides, he had 6 kids to raise, and he's helping me now, so I don't want to look the gift horse in the mouth. But this stuff just takes an unbelievable amount of time. Those of you that have restored old automobiles know exactly what I'm talking about. Those of you who haven't, I assume that you've probably worked on something similar or known of people that worked on things that are similar, and can actually understand exactly where I'm coming from. And by the way, not complaining, we had tons of fun, loads of fun. It was just a remarkable amount of fun. And so we're doing the podcast today. A few things to talk about. I was in Pennsylvania this week on business installing equipment that I had sold. And I had some things that happened on the road and some things that happened while I was on the phone earlier in the week. And I had some things happen to friends of mine, associates of mine, and they have me scratching my head, wondering what in the name of God's green earth are things, what's going on nowadays? People are just insane. It's almost like we live in a third world country anymore with the services that we expect versus the results we get for the money we pay. So I'll talk about that. But afterwards, I'm going to talk about this. Actually, the essay today is, the title of the essay today is Inflation Really a Myth? And you think to yourself, well, of course it's not a myth, Strong. Inflation's for real. I mean, haven't you read the news? I mean, it's down, but it's still over 5%, which the Fed wants it to be too, and we're not there. And come on. Do you know how the United States government calculates inflation? I'm going to tell you. I didn't know this until this week. And once upon a time, I used to be somewhat of a conspiracy theorist. I'm less so now because most of these conspiracies, I think, are just that. But at the very least, I can certainly understand why we have such a large percentage of conspiracy theorists in this country, perhaps in the world, because of the way the government does things. And these articles are I got most of my information from the Wall Street Journal on this one, some of it from CNN. So again, none from Alex Jones, none from Breitbart, none from the Babylon Bee or the Onion. These are reputable news sources. I think a little bit I got from the New York Times as well. So regardless as to what you think of the politics of those three publications, pretty much they're reliable, in my opinion. I found them to be quite reliable. But inflation is measured in this country in a very strange way. So we'll talk about that. Is high inflation just a myth? But first, I want to talk about some just problems with stuff that's out there. And I know everybody has had problems with the service industry because the shortage of jobs, nobody wants to work for the money that they're being paid, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I had a few things happen, and this was one of them from I'll not mention names because these people don't want their names plastered all over my dopey podcast, but they're individuals whom I've spoken with, and they've told me these stories, and they're reliable, and they just, If it wasn't so prevalent, I would say it was shocking. But I'll tell these stories to you folks, and I think every one of you are going to say, yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all. The first of which is an experience I had at the Philadelphia airport. Prices have gone through the roof when it comes to certain things, but there's always a workaround, okay? Case in point, flying into Philadelphia, to rent a car, just a plain old standard car in Philadelphia, was $139 a day. Now, once upon a time, not too long ago, it was more like $39 to $59 a day. Okay, so it's gone up $100 a day. And while I'm not paying this bill, my employer is. My employer is not built of gold. So as a responsible employee, I tried to find a cheaper way, and I did. And it was a off the airport guy who rents cars. And actually the car was fine. Okay. But it took a whole lot more time just to pick up the car and drop off the car, which means I'm going to get to my hotel later. No big deal, but I need to leave my hotel earlier because you have to plan for extra time and effort. Okay. Because it's going to take longer because it's an off airport drop site for the car. Okay. But again, they were fine. Everything was good. They charged me $200 a week less for the car than the ones on the airport. So I think it was worth it. There was a little anxiety involved because I was thinking to myself, you know what? I may or may not get lunch because if everything doesn't go smoothly, I'm not going to get lunch. Everything did go fairly smoothly. I had plenty of time. I got to the airport. I thought, you know what? My plane does not board for over half an hour, almost 40 minutes. So I can get myself a bite to eat. Now, because of schedules, normally I fly Southwest Air. This time I flew to Philadelphia via Southwest, but I came home via American. The prices were about the same, but American had a better schedule coming home, okay? I would have had to wait an extra 3 hours to come home via Southwest, so I flew there on Southwest, back on American. Again, price is the same, schedule a little bit better, but I'm not real familiar with that part of the Philadelphia Airport terminal, so I had to walk up and down to find out, okay, where am I going to eat? Because I'm not familiar with the restaurants. Found a place called La Colombier, and I think I'm pronouncing that right, maybe not. It's basically it's a sandwich shop. Okay, they have donuts, they have coffee, they have croissants, and they have sandwiches that they'll cook up for you. So, okay, I've got 10 minutes before my plane boards, okay? So I can order a quick sandwich. So I did. And there was nobody in front of me. I walked right up. The lady took my order. There were 3 guys in the back doing the cooking. And it was really, I say in the back, you could see what was going on in this place because it was it was like in an island. Okay. So it wasn't in a kiosk per se. It was an island that was in the middle of the terminal. So you could see the guys cooking, and there were 3 of them, and they were slap happy, just jacking around, screwing off, but okay, that's fine. There's no food. So the lady took my order, took my money, and then left. And some other guy took her place. So I'm waiting 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 10 minutes. And people have come up and ordered stuff and they've left, but they've ordered stuff like iced coffee and a soda or a donut or a croissant, nothing that needed to be cooked. And these guys are still jacking around in the back. So I walk up to the counter and one of the cooks says, "Can I help you?" I said, "Yeah. I'm waiting for my sandwich to be cooked." He said, "Oh, you ordered a sandwich?" I said, "Yeah." "What did you order?" I said, "An Italian sandwich." "Okay, I'll cook it." Did nobody tell him? Did he forget? So I'm waiting, and I expect the guy to walk right back, take a bun, take the meat, put it in there, put it in the oven, let it heat up for a few minutes, and give it to me. No, he just continued to jack around and screw around with his friends for another 2 or 3 minutes. Finally, I'm looking down at my watch. I'm thinking, you know what? My plane is about to board. So I go up to the guy in the front at the cash register. I say, "Look, they're not making my sandwich yet. Can you give me my money back?" And the guy looks at me and says, "I don't know why you're yelling at me." I said, "I'm not yelling. I'm just telling you. I paid for a sandwich well over 10 minutes ago. Nobody's making it. I'd like my money back, please." So he did it to me and just gave me a dirty look. Now, the reason I tell this story is it's nothing out of the ordinary with the level of service that you get at certain places. However, the story used to be once upon a time, well, you know what? You can't hire people and nobody's wanting to work and blah, blah, blah. There were 4 people working at this place, 3 of them in the back cooking, and none of them were doing a doggone thing. And then when I called it their attention, they got mad at me like I was the one that was being the jerk. I just scratched my head. I went back. Well, the plane was running a little bit late, so I was able to get myself a protein shake and a energy bar, and that was my lunch on Friday. So again, just the stuff that goes on, it just makes you scratch your head. Because if it's not one thing, it's another. If you find people who are going to work at these places, they are just kind of just showing up sometimes because they had no problem staffing this place. It's just the staff didn't want to do a doggone thing. Unbelievable. Another problem that I was told about had to do with the post office. And this individual, she hadn't gotten her mail in a few days. And she'd get her mail about 3 or 4 times a week. And she wouldn't get mail for 2 days, and then the mailbox would be full. In other words, the Postal Service was just waiting, and then they just give her 2 or 3 days worth of mail. She wasn't getting her mail every day. So this individual was retired, so she went up to the Postal Service, to the post office, and started complaining. "Hey, look, you're not coming to my post office every day. I know what I should be getting. I'm not getting it. I'm only getting someone coming to my mailbox every 3 or 4 days. That's it." And the response she got was just, to me, unbelievable. Now, I must admit, I don't deal with the post office very often. I almost never go to the post office. I don't mail much. If I need to mail something, I use stamps.com. which is a whole lot easier. But I just don't use the post office very much. I remember once upon a time back in the day, probably 20 years ago, when I did go to the post office about once or twice a month. They were always very kind, generous, smiling, efficient. But this time, not so much. After the lady explained to the people, look, I need to have somebody coming by my house more often than 3 or 4 times a week. They need to be coming every day. The lady raised her voice and told this customer, look, you're lucky you're getting mail at all. Getting mail is a privilege. And then the lady just lost it. The customer just lost it. She says, it's not a privilege. It's your job. It's your job to have the mail delivered to my house every day. Don't tell me it's a privilege. Every piece of mail that goes into my box, somebody has paid you money to put that mail in my box. You've accepted the contract. You've accepted to do that. You're just not doing it every day, and I want you to do it. She said, well, look, you're just going to be lucky that you get what you get. Another individual at the same post office went up to get stamps, and he walked in to get the stamps, and all the kiosks were closed. And the people who are normally back behind the plexiglass were in front in the vestibule of the post office, just talking and laughing and having a good time. And this individual said, hey, I'd like to buy some stamps. And they said, we're at lunch. Come back at 2:30. First of all, why do you all take lunch at the same time? Second of all, lunch doesn't last until 2:30. I know nobody who gets from 12 to 2:30 for lunch. And they just told this guy to come back at 2:30. Unbelievable. Oh, and by the way, U.S. Postal Service is raising the rates of stamps again. I'm sorry. If you're a postal worker, one of two things is going on here. You're either very upset with me because I'm not giving you a fair shake. If that's the case, sorry, Charlie. I know what I've seen. I know what people have told me. Or you may be shaking your head, looking at the ground and saying, yeah, I know. It's like that. I'm sorry. But the Postal Service has just gone to pot. And we may find out at the end of this month how valuable or invaluable the Postal Service is, because UPS may be going on strike. Once upon a time, UPS went on strike when I was with another business. And when they went on strike, FedEx can only take so many packages. Well, FedEx used to take 10 packages a day for you. They said, okay, we won't take 10 anymore, but we'll take 12. Well, some 300 a day went out of my old company's shipping room via UPS. So to take an extra 2 really doesn't help. So most of it was shipped via the U.S. Postal Service. And it was slower, but for the most part, pretty dependable. If UPS took something 4 days to get to it, the Postal Service would take 7 days. But it cost less. But it always got there, okay? And to be fair, they were taking on far more volume than they had in the past. So the reason, why do I bring this up? The post office says that they can't be a viable entity because nobody uses their services anymore. If UPS goes on strike and people start shipping via the USPS, let's see how they handle the incoming business. Hopefully that'll never happen, but if it does, we'll see. Or as they say, film at 11. Last thing I wanted to mention is the service problem I've had with another entity, another business, I'll just say. I'll not mention who this is, but I'll mention the problems that me and others have had with this type of service. I'm trying to make this as anonymous as I can because I don't want to mention the individuals, nor do I want to mention the type of service until the end of this little story. Trying to make an appointment for an individual. I was doing that. And, of course, you try to call for an appointment, and you can't make an appointment. What you have to do is you leave a message, and then they will call you back at their convenience. And then they do, and you make the appointment. That's okay, that's just how they work. But then you leave the message, and they don't call you back. Now what do? You can't call them again. Oh, and by the way, and they say, no, well, by the way, don't be leaving multiple messages. Just leave one. That's enough. And then they don't call you back. Well, they've already told you we're going to call you back and don't leave multiple messages. But if they don't call you back, what's your option? To leave multiple messages? And you can't call them because they don't answer the phone. They just take a name and number and they call you back. Sometimes. Well, this individual never called back. So the appointment was never made. I had another very similar service, the same type of business, I'll just say, okay? And it was the same thing. You called and they said, look, don't call anymore. Go on the website. We'll answer all your questions on the website. Okay, so I'd go to the website and the questions weren't answered. So I called again. And they said, well, don't leave stuff on the website. You should call us. I said, look, I used to call. They said, leave stuff on the website. I used to leave the questions on the website. Now you say to call. What's the deal? And I let them have it. They said, well, that individual doesn't work here anymore, and we've straightened things out. They should be a little bit better right now, okay? The third one was something that happened just to me. And I had a service performed, and I received a bill for that service. And that bill was sent to me via text. I just ignored it. Thinking, okay, well, this is just okay, you're going to get this bill in the mail soon. Well, I received another text about a week later. This is your second notice. The bill has to be paid. Now, this was me personally, so this wasn't a secondhand story from a very reliable individual. This is what happened to me personally, okay? A fourth story. Again, the arrangement was made. I have to have a service done. This was another individual, not me, who have to have a service done. And this individual was told, okay, well, come in and see us. So they came in for the consultation, and they said, well, we don't have you on the schedule. And this individual said, look, you sent me a confirming email. Here it is. Oh, okay, well, we'll work you in then. And they did. And they scheduled a service. And that service never happened. And then finally they found out, well, the people who actually do the work, they have a dispute with the people that they work for. So for all intents and purposes, they've been on strike. So we don't know what we're going to do. Now you think to yourself, okay, Strong, these are all fine stories, but you're being very vague. The service I'm talking about is the medical profession. Doctors. That's right. Medical doctors, medical procedures. My personal one, when I was in the hospital for this spider bite a couple of weeks ago, they have a doctor, because your doctor doesn't come see you anymore in the hospital. They have what's called a hospitalist. And the hospitalist sent me a bill. And they sent the bill via text, which I've never had happen before. And then they sent me a second notice. Hey, you're late. You need to pay this bill. Here's everything that we paid for. Well, insurance didn't really pay for much of it. You know why? Because they had me down as a Medicare patient. I'm not on Medicare. They had the wrong insurance. That's okay. I sent them a text back. Look, you have my wrong insurance. Contact me. I got a text back. Look, we don't correspond via text. You got to go to the website and figure that out. So I don't know what I'm going to do now, because they've sent me a second notice for a bill. I'm not going to pay a bill via text. And besides, you've got my insurance wrong. I have no idea why you had me down as a Medicare customer, because I'm not 65 and I gave you my insurance card when I checked into the hospital. The other one is a procedure that an individual I know has to have done. It's an expensive medical procedure. And they basically said, look, the doctors are having problems and they're on strike. The doctors are on strike. This isn't UPS. This is a doctor. What do you mean you're on strike? And you don't tell anybody? You just don't call them? It's getting so the doctors are a life and death type thing, okay? But doctors anymore are no more reliable than the kiosk at the Philadelphia airport, okay? Now, okay, poor James didn't get his dopey lunch on Friday afternoon. poor, pitiful him. Okay, the world didn't come to an end. Probably didn't need that sandwich anyway. Fattening and bad for you. The energy drink and the energy bar probably was a better health option anyhow, okay? The world doesn't come to an end when they totally screw up your sandwich. But when they screw up a medical procedure, to me, that's unexcusable. And this were 4 different cases with 4 different individuals, 4 different times, and all of this within the last, actually, to be fair, one of them was about a month and a half ago. The rest of them were within the last 2 weeks, okay? To me, that's just unbelievable. It's just unbelievable and not to mention unacceptable. And I've said this before, maybe it's the fact that, maybe I'm just a complainer now. But I don't think so. When it comes to the sandwich, maybe. When it comes to the post office, maybe. When it comes to the incompetence of a doctor's office, no, not at all. You're not being petty at all. Okay, I've ranted and raved for 26 minutes, and I haven't even gotten into the essay yet. But you've heard about inflation. Everybody knows about inflation. My question to you is high inflation a myth? And the answer could be maybe. And you think to yourself, well, why would you say that, Strong? I know prices are higher than they've ever been. Well, they are and they aren't, okay? Not too long ago, we had $4 gasoline. We had $4 cartons of eggs. Well, now I just paid $3.20 for gasoline. And eggs are back down to just over $1 a dozen. So while they did go up, they're back down, okay? So is inflation really high or not? Well, the government says it is. Government says we're still up around 5%. And the Fed wants us to be around 2%, okay? But how is inflation measured? Well, you think, well, there's a consumer price index, Strong. How much a basket of groceries cost? Nope, actually, it's not. In fact, if the core index came in below 3%, the Federal Reserve would probably breathe a huge sigh of relief. Stocks would head to the races and consumers could relax about the cost of living, okay? But this isn't a dream. I mean, measure U.S. price changes the way Europe does, and inflation was already below 3% back in May, and it dropped further in June. Now, measure them as the United States does, and the figure is up around 5% for June. Now, the U.S. and Europe use different methods to collect inflation data, but the Bureau of Labor Statistics calculates the American price rises the way the Europeans do, although they don't publish the results, and they remain kind of obscure, okay? Now, right now, as we speak, measuring the U.S. inflation using 2 methods shows radically different results. Investors who think they have a handle on this current consensus that the underlying inflation is falling but not fast enough for the Fed should be troubled by the alternative messages coming from much lower European versions of the same figures. Now, U.S. core inflation excludes food and energy. Did you know that? Yeah, they exclude food and energy because that's too volatile. Well, everybody eats and everybody uses energy. So if you exclude those two from the standard way that inflation is measured, you get somewhat of a skewed result, don't you? And actually, the European style inflation is known as the Harmonized Index of Consumer Prices. And the difference between the European style and the U.S. style is huge. The European style is just over 2%. The United States is just under 5%. Now, again, what's the difference in the way they measure it? In fact, the reason the Europeans measure, known as the HICP, doesn't include an imaginary cost that the U.S. figure includes. What imaginary cost? Well, I just found this out this week, and some of you may have already known this, but in our inflation rate, we have something called, it's called owner's equivalent rent. Now, what does that mean? Well, included in the price of inflation is, if you're a homeowner, how much would it cost to rent the house that you live in? That figure is thrown into the inflation rate. Never mind that virtually nobody rents the house that they own, okay, or rents the house that they make a payment on. So check this out. If you own a house, let's not say you own a house. The bank owns the house, but you live in it, and you're paying $2,000 a month for your mortgage. Included in that inflation rate was how much it would cost you if you rented that same house. That, my friends, is ridiculous. Now, the reason, and they said, why do we do that? Well, why would you include something that nobody actually pays? Okay. Why wouldn't you concentrate on core inflation, like food and energy prices? Well, because that's just not how we do it. And if you take that figure away, folks, we're already at about 3%. So figure this out, okay? Let's say you could remove one thing, one of your bills, and if you could remove that bill, things would be all right. That one bill, remove the amount of rent that you pay on the house that you already own. Guess what? You don't pay that rent anyway. So inflation, my friends, is 3%. The Fed wants it to be about 3%. The stock market wants it to be about 3%. And you think to yourself, well, the stock market has been going up. And I've heard countless ways, inflation remains high, but the stock market keeps going up. Why is that? Well, because inflation's not really high. And while you and I may not have known that the way they calculate inflation is that dopey way where it's included the rent that you have to pay on the house you own, people in the stock market knew that. And that's why the market has been on a rally. We're in a true bear market and have been for a little while. And people wonder why we have conspiracy theories. In fact, if a month ago somebody had told me, well, here's a conspiracy theory for you, Strong, inflation really isn't high, because the government figures inflation on a figure that they include the rent you would pay on the house that you already own, I'd look at them like they had three heads. What are you talking about? That's a stupid. Would you hear that on Alex Jones? Friends, I read this in the Wall Street Journal on July the 12th. It's a real deal. That really is how they figure inflation. So when the government says something is so, and nobody believes it, quite often it's because it's not true. It's just not true. That's just a bizarre way to measure inflation. Later on, there was a story, same day, but later on in the day. In fact, this story was published at 4:09 p.m. The first story was published at, let me give you a timestamp. It was published at 2:00 p.m. So 2.5 hours later, a story came out. It says, inflation really is 3% in June. Lowest pace in more than 2 years. So the Wall Street Journal breaks this big story about how the government measured inflation in a stupid way, and it's really not 5%, it's closer to 3%. Then a story comes out and says, you know what, we've looked at this thing again, and inflation really is 3%. Oh, it's bizarre. It's just bizarre. And I don't know why things are this way, but the best way for me to look at a statistic, at a number, at how things are, is for me to just figure it out myself. How are things for me? Okay. And I think that instead of looking at different statistics, if more people would just look at things like, how are things for me, they'd be better off. And What's the old adage? What's the difference between a recession and a depression? A recession is when your buddy's out of work. A depression is when you're out of work. Okay. In other words, how does it affect me? Case in point, if the price of Asian vacations doubled, that wouldn't affect me because I'm not going on an Asian vacation. If the price of European vacations had doubled, okay, that mightn't affect me because I'm going on a European vacation, actually, that I paid for over a year ago, so it doesn't matter, but you get the point. If if the price of housing has gone way up, if the price of houses has gone way up, that doesn't affect me because I'm not buying a house. If I were, then it would affect me, okay? If the lending rate went through the roof, that would affect me, except for I'm not borrowing money, so it doesn't affect me. You get my picture? Now, what does affect me is the price of restaurant food going up because I take the trophy wife to dinner every Saturday night. That affects me, okay? Because I do that. I spend on that. And when things get out of whack, you just don't buy them. Now, that doesn't work for things like electricity, okay? But it works for other things. But speaking of electricity, for instance, we've had a heat wave. Here in the Midwest, it's not nearly as hot as in the South, but it is summertime. It's July, soon to be August. And July and early August in the United States is hot. It always has been. It always will be. It makes the news, but it's really not. Guess what? 6 months from now, it's going to be cold in the Northeast. Okay? That's just how things are. But there's a story out of California about how now more people in Central California, in the Pacific Northwest, and in the United States Northeast, they're now having to get air conditioning because of global warming. Things are a bit warmer there now, and they used to be able to go without air conditioning. Now they're having to buy air conditioning, which is fine, except for there's already not enough electricity. And all these green people are saying, but we need electricity because it's too hot. I have to turn on my air conditioner. Okay, I get it. But if you're saying our carbon footprint is too big, but I want to live in air conditioning, that doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense at all. Our carbon footprint is too big. We need to stop generating electricity. Oh, by the way, I need to turn my air conditioner up or down, whatever you want to say. Make it cool more, okay? Kind of like when John Kerry, the climate guy, jumped all over everybody because they were criticizing him flying to all these green summits in his private plane. And basically he said, look, I'm so important, I can't fly commercial. I have to have a private plane because I'm more important than you are. I'm getting stuff done. If you're a climate change person and say, look, we need to stop having a big carbon footprint. Oh, by the way, I need air conditioning. Suck it up, buttercup. Or install a new hydroelectric plant in your town so you can get electricity. One of two things. You can't have it both ways. Can't have it both ways. Interesting times, interesting things going on. We do live in interesting times. Anybody who says, you know what, things are truly boring isn't paying attention. Well, that's it. I'm done. Hope you enjoyed the podcast. JamesStrongShow@hotmail.com. That's the email address. Send me your email address. I will send you a link to the podcast upon publication so you can download it and listen to it at your leisure. That's it. I'm done. Until next time, this is James Strong saying adios.